Sometimes, the most profound lessons about prejudice come at the highest price. The Ritz-Carlton's pristine lobby fell silent that rainy October evening. Security guards flanked a well-dressed black man, their hands hovering near their weapons as if he posed an imminent threat. Hotel guests stopped mid-conversation, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. The man's tailored Tom Ford suit, worth more than the guards' monthly salaries combined, was apparently insufficient to prevent what was about to happen. "Sir, we've received complaints about a suspicious individual matching your description," the head of security announced, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "We're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Marcus Thompson's fingers tightened around his leather briefcase, the same briefcase containing documents confirming his recent $300 million acquisition of the very hotel trying to throw him out. He could have ended this humiliation with a single sentence, but something deeper, more visceral, compelled him to remain silent. 20 years of fighting prejudice in corporate America had taught him that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from letting people dig their own graves. Little did they know, this evening would change not just the fate of this prestigious hotel, but the lives of everyone involved in this grave miscalculation. 3 months earlier, Marcus Thompson stood at the window of his Manhattan office, 48 floors above the bustling city streets. At 42, he had built Thompson Hospitality Group into a billion-dollar empire, though the journey had been anything but smooth. His reflection in the glass showed a man weathered by experience, sharp brown eyes that had seen too many boardroom battles, and subtle gray streaks in his short black hair that he'd earned fighting his way to the top. Mr. Thompson. His assistant, Sarah, appeared at the door. "The board meeting is about to start. They're discussing the Ritz-Carlton acquisition." Marcus nodded, straightening his tie. This acquisition had been 6 months in the making. A delicate dance of negotiations, number crunching, and strategic planning. The Ritz-Carlton in question wasn't just any hotel. It was the flagship property of the Richardson Hotel Group, a family-owned business with a reputation for old money and even older attitudes. The boardroom was already full when Marcus entered. 12 faces turned to look at him. 11 board members and Richard Richardson III himself, the silver-haired patriarch of the Richardson Empire. The tension in the room was palpable. "Marcus." Richard's voice carried that particular tone of forced politeness that Marcus had grown accustomed to over the years. "I must admit, when my board first mentioned selling to Thompson Hospitality, I had my reservations." Marcus caught the slight emphasis on reservations, the carefully coded language of prejudice he'd encountered throughout his career. He smiled diplomatically, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Understandable, Richard. Change is always challenging, especially for establishments with such traditional values." The meeting proceeded with the usual formalities, presentations, projections, and proposals. But beneath the surface, currents of unspoken tension swirled. Marcus noticed the subtle glances between Richard and his board members, the way they seemed to communicate without words. What they didn't know was that Marcus had already secured the votes he needed. While Richard had been busy maintaining his old-world facade, Marcus had spent months building relationships with younger board members who saw the future differently. "Before we proceed to the vote," Richard announced, straightening in his chair, "I feel it's my duty to express certain concerns about the direction of the hotel under new management. Our guests have certain expectations, traditions that have been maintained for—" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "And what traditions would those be, Richard?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Richard's face flushed slightly, but before he could respond, one of the younger board members, Michael Chen, spoke up. "I think what's traditional isn't always what's right," Chen said firmly. "I move we proceed with the vote." The next few minutes would change everything. One by one, hands raised in favor of the acquisition. Richard's face grew increasingly pale as he watched his family's legacy slip away. The final count: 8 in favor, 4 against. Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I assure you, the Ritz-Carlton's reputation for excellence will only be enhanced under Thompson Hospitality's management." He paused, looking directly at Richard. "Though some traditions, I'm afraid, will need to be reconsidered." As the board members filed out, Richard remained seated, staring at the papers in front of him. Marcus approached him quietly. "You know, Richard," he said softly, "my father used to work as a janitor in a hotel, not unlike this one. He wasn't allowed to use the front entrance. Times change." Richard looked up, his eyes hard. "They certainly do, Mr. Thompson. They certainly do." What Marcus didn't know then was that Richard's words carried a warning. The old man might have lost the vote, but he wasn't done fighting. The next 3 months would test not just Marcus's business acumen, but his very identity as a black man in a world that still clung to its prejudices. As Marcus left the boardroom that day, he had no idea that his greatest battle was yet to come, a confrontation that would begin in the lobby of his own hotel, surrounded by security guards who didn't know they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. The transition of power at the Ritz-Carlton proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. While the paperwork was complete, the hotel's culture seemed resistant to change, like an immune system fighting off a foreign body. Marcus noticed it in the small things first. Weekly reports arrived late or incomplete. Staff meetings were scheduled at conflicting times. Equipment malfunctioned mysteriously just before important client visits. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, but together they formed a pattern that Marcus had seen before, the quiet rebellion of an establishment refusing to accept new leadership. What troubled him most was the exodus of long-time guests. The hotel's occupancy rate had dropped 15% in the first month after the acquisition. Anonymous reviews began appearing online, subtly hinting at declining standards and changes in the hotel's character. One morning, Marcus found Sarah waiting in his office, her face tight with concern. "You need to see this," she said, sliding a folder across his desk. Inside were printouts of emails, dozens of them, circulating among the hotel's old guard. They had been forwarded by a sympathetic employee. The contents made Marcus's blood run cold. "Operation Restoration," read the subject line of one email. "Phase 1, create doubt. Phase 2, force errors. Phase 3, public incident." The emails were careful to avoid explicit racial language, but the implications were clear. Richard Richardson III was orchestrating a campaign to undermine Marcus's leadership and force a crisis that would damage Thompson Hospitality's reputation. "They're planning something big," Sarah said quietly. "The last email mentions something about the International Hoteliers Association conference next week." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The IHA conference was the industry's most prestigious annual event, and this year it was being held at the Ritz-Carlton. Over 500 of the world's top hoteliers would be in attendance. Perfect timing for a public relations disaster, Marcus mused. Have security do a full sweep of the hotel. I want every inch of this place checked for anything that could go wrong during the conference." But Richard had been clever. The security sweep found nothing obvious, no sabotage, no clear threats, just the constant, subtle pressure of a system designed to crack. The conference week arrived, bringing with it a parade of luxury cars and distinguished guests. Marcus maintained a visible presence, personally greeting key attendees and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But beneath his confident exterior, he was watching, waiting for Richard's move. It came from an unexpected direction. "Mr. Thompson," a young black employee named James, appeared at his office door, looking nervous. "Can I speak with you privately?" Once inside, James revealed that he'd been approached by someone offering him money to create a scene during the conference, to act drunk and disorderly, to embarrass the hotel. "They said it would be a good opportunity to show that you're hiring the wrong kind of people," James said, his voice shaking. "They wanted me to be the proof." Marcus felt a mixture of anger and pride. Anger at the manipulation, pride in James for coming forward. "Thank you for telling me, James, but I have a different idea." Over the next few days, Marcus put his own plan into motion. He arranged for several prominent black business leaders to attend the conference. He also quietly documented every instance of discrimination and sabotage, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. But Richard had one more card to play. The evening of the conference's gala dinner, Marcus received an urgent call from the hotel's front desk. A group of wealthy regular guests had complained about feeling uncomfortable with the new clientele. The head of security, a holdover from the Richardson era, had taken it upon himself to address the situation. As Marcus hurried to the lobby, he could already see the scene unfolding. The same scene that would soon become a viral sensation and a turning point in his battle against institutional racism. The security guards were approaching their target, not realizing they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Marcus could have intervened immediately, could have revealed his identity and ended it all. But he remembered James, remembered every subtle slight and coded comment, remembered his father using the back entrance of hotels, just like this one. Sometimes, he realized, the only way to expose prejudice was to let it show its true face. Rain drummed against the lobby's windows as Marcus Thompson, owner of the Ritz-Carlton, stood silently and allowed himself to be treated as an unwelcome intruder in his own hotel. The security cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of what was about to become a watershed moment in the history of American hospitality. The head of security stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. "Sir, we've received complaints about a suspicious individual matching your description. We're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Behind him, through the lobby's revolving doors, Marcus could see Richard Richardson III stepping out of his car, right on schedule for the evening's events. Everything was falling into place, though not in the way Richard had planned. Marcus smiled slightly, gripping his briefcase tighter. The real show was about to begin. The Ritz-Carlton's lobby had become a stage, and every person present was now an unwitting actor in a drama years in the making. Hotel guests watched from behind their phones, already recording what they assumed would be another viral video of racial profiling. They had no idea they were about to witness something far more powerful. "Sir, this is your final warning," the head of security, Robert Wells, declared. His hand rested meaningfully on his radio, ready to call for backup. "Our guests have reported feeling threatened by your presence." Marcus Thompson studied the man before him, mid-50s, graying at the temples, 20-plus years in hotel security, according to his personnel file. Robert Wells had been Richard Richardson's right-hand man in maintaining standards at the hotel for over a decade. Could you tell me? Marcus asked calmly, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby, exactly what about my presence is threatening? The question hung in the air like smoke. Through the growing crowd, Marcus could see James, the young employee who had warned him, positioning himself near the security camera's blind spots with his phone discreetly recording. Wells shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we have protocols." "Yes, protocols," Marcus interrupted, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "Let's discuss those protocols. Would these be the same protocols that resulted in a 300% increase in reported suspicious person incidents since the hotel's ownership changed? The same protocols that somehow only seem to apply to certain types of guests?" A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Richard Richardson III, who had been watching from near the entrance, began moving forward, perhaps sensing things were not going according to plan. "Now, see here," Wells started. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Or perhaps," he continued, opening his briefcase, "you'd like to discuss these protocols." He pulled out a stack of papers, printouts of the emails detailing Operation Restoration, the ones specifically designed to, and I quote, "restore the hotel's traditional character." Richard froze mid-step. Totka. Several of the conference attendees who had gathered to watch began whispering among themselves, recognizing both Marcus and Richard. "I don't know who you think you are," Wells began, his face reddening, "but he's Marcus Thompson," a voice rang out. It was Chen, the board member who had supported the acquisition. He had just entered the lobby and quickly assessed the situation. "He's the owner of this hotel." The effect was immediate. Wells's face drained of color. The security guards stepped back, as if burned. Through the crowd, Marcus could see Richard Richardson attempting to retreat toward the exit. "Mr. Richardson," Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "Please stay. We should all hear this." Richard stopped, trapped by protocol and propriety, the very weapons he had tried to use against Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus addressed the crowd, many of whom were influential members of the International Hoteliers Association. "What you've witnessed tonight was not a random incident. It was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated campaign to undermine new ownership through manufactured incidents of racial tension." He held up the emails. "We have documented evidence of systematic discrimination, orchestrated by former owner Richard Richardson and carried out by key staff members, including Mr. Wells here. Their goal was to create a public relations crisis during this conference, forcing a sale." The lobby erupted in shocked whispers. Several prominent hoteliers were already on their phones, presumably calling their legal departments. "Mr. Wells," Marcus turned back to the head of security, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "You're fired. Please surrender your badge and radio to the deputy head of security." He paused, then added, "And yes, you can explain to your next employer that you were terminated for attempting to remove the owner of a hotel from his own property because of the color of his skin." Marcus then turned to address the gathering of hotel staff that had formed around the edges of the lobby. "To all employees, this hotel's mission is to provide exceptional service to all guests, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or background. Those who cannot or will not..." Richard Richardson finally found his voice. "You'll never prove any of this," he sputtered. "It's your word against..." "Actually," James stepped forward, holding up his phone, "it's all on video, multiple videos from multiple angles, including some very interesting conversations in the security office over the past few weeks." Marcus nodded at James. "Thank you. Mr. Richardson, your attempt to orchestrate a racist incident in this lobby has succeeded beyond your wildest dreams. It's just not quite the incident you planned. The sound of police sirens could be heard approaching the hotel. Marcus had coordinated with them in advance, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. Officers will want to speak with both you and Mr. Wells about various violations of civil rights laws, Marcus informed them. They're particularly interested in the documented pattern of discrimination under your leadership. As the police entered the lobby, Marcus turned to address the gathered crowd one final time. The rain had stopped outside, and through the windows he could see camera crews arriving, right on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption to your evening. However, I believe what you've witnessed here tonight is more valuable than any conference session could be. This is not just about one hotel or one incident. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo. As the police led Wells and Richardson away, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the lobby's mirrors, the same lobby where his father had once been forbidden to enter. He allowed himself a small smile. But this victory, sweet as it was just the beginning. The real work of transformation was still to come. The aftermath of that rainy evening reverberated through the hospitality industry like a shockwave. By morning, the video had gone viral, with millions of views across social media platforms. Major news networks ran the story with headlines like "Hotel Owner Exposes Systematic Racism in Luxury Hospitality" and "The Night That Changed the Hotel Industry." The International Hoteliers Association, still in session at the Ritz-Carlton, turned their remaining conference days into an impromptu summit on diversity and inclusion in the hospitality industry. Marcus's handling of the situation became an immediate case study in crisis management and corporate leadership. But the real work began behind the scenes. In the weeks that followed, Marcus implemented sweeping changes at the Ritz-Carlton. The hotel's hiring practices were completely overhauled. A diversity and inclusion board was established, with James, the young employee who had helped expose the discrimination, appointed as one of its key members. "Your father would be proud," Sarah told Marcus one morning, as they reviewed applications for the new position of Chief Diversity Officer. Marcus smiled, touching the old janitor's key card he now kept framed in his office, his father's own piece of hotel history. He always said change doesn't come from waiting at the back door. It comes from walking through the front. The legal consequences for Richard Richardson III and Robert Wells were substantial. The documented evidence of systematic discrimination led to criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Several former employees came forward with their own stories, painting a picture of decades of institutional racism. But perhaps the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Marcus received a letter from Richard Richardson IV, the former owner's son, who had distanced himself from his father years ago. "Dear Mr. Thompson," the letter began, "my grandfather built this hotel on the principle of exceptional service. Somewhere along the way, that principle became corrupted by prejudice. What you did wasn't just about exposing racism. It was about restoring the true meaning of hospitality." 6 months after the incident, the Ritz-Carlton hosted a different kind of event, the inaugural Hospitality Equality Summit. Hotel owners and executives from around the world gathered to discuss concrete steps toward making the industry more inclusive. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse faces in the audience. Among them was his old mentor, the man who had given him his first hotel job 30 years ago, now retired but beaming with pride. "The true measure of luxury," Marcus began his keynote speech, "is not in the marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It's in how we treat every human being who walks through our doors. Hospitality, at its core, is about making people feel welcome. All people. He paused, looking around the same lobby where, months earlier, he had been treated as an intruder. Some of you may know that my father worked as a janitor in a hotel much like this one. He used to tell me stories about the back entrances and service elevators he was required to use. But he also told me something else. He said that true change doesn't come from tearing down institutions. It comes from... In the front row, James sat with his new team, taking notes. He had been promoted to Director of Community Relations, and his innovative programs were already being copied by other hotels. Tonight, I'm announcing the creation of the Thompson Hospitality Scholarship Fund. Each year we will provide full hospitality management education for 50 students from underrepresented communities. Because change isn't just about policies and procedures, it's about creating new opportunities. And the applause was thunderous, but Marcus wasn't finished. And one more thing. Starting today, every employee in every Thompson hospitality property will enter through the front door. Because in our hotels, there is no back entrance. There is no us versus them. There is only we. Later that evening, as the summit attendees mingled at the reception, Marcus stood by the lobby window where it had all begun. The rain had returned, but this time it felt different, cleansing, renewing. Sarah appeared at his side with a tablet. The occupancy rates are up 40% from last year. Turns out, doing the right thing is good for business. Marcus nodded, watching the diverse mix of guests and staff moving through the lobby. A young black family was being checked in, their children marveling at the chandeliers. The front desk manager, a new hire from the scholarship program, was treating them with the same impeccable courtesy she showed to everyone. "You know what the best part is?" Marcus said quietly. "This isn't a special occasion. This is just a normal evening at the Ritz-Carlton." And it was. The hotel had transformed from a symbol of exclusion to a beacon of change. The incident that was meant to destroy Marcus Thompson's ownership had instead catalyzed a transformation of the entire industry. As he watched a new generation of hoteliers learning to lead with both excellence and equality, Marcus thought about the long arc of history, from his father's janitor's key card to his own ownership of this prestigious hotel. Change, he realized, wasn't just about one dramatic moment. It was about all the moments that followed, all the small decisions and daily choices that turned an incident into a movement. The Ritz-Carlton stood as proof that tradition and progress could coexist, that excellence could be inclusive, and that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice was not just to overcome it, but to transform it into something better. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, a new day had already begun.